Let's get to the NFC North here. Let's start with the Detroit Lions. For all of these teams, we've been doing their offseason in 60 seconds. Let's run through the Lions. Retain Ben Johnson as their offensive coordinator. It's big time. Jared Goff gets a monster 4-year, $212 million extension with $170 million guaranteed. Good for Jared Goff. Amon-Ra St. Brown extended. Penei Sewell extended. Taylor Decker gets a new contract. Graham Glasgow gets a starting level deal to step in as a guard after he was kind of a depth piece last year. Brought in DJ Reader in free agency. Biggest splash move they made. 2 years, $22 million. Amik Robertson at corner. Marcus Davenport comes on another one of those low-cost one-year deals that have dice roll the last 2 years he's been in the NFC North. And Kevin Zeitler comes in to replace Jonah Jackson. They also acquired Carlton Davis in a trade from the Bucks. Jonah Jackson, CJ Gardner-Johnson, Josh Reynolds all gone in free agency. And this is up your alley. Their 2 top draft picks, Terrion Arnold and Enos Rakestraw at corner. Your type of guys, 3 of them coming in to play for the Lions this year.
On offense, they pretty much just brought the band back. And when you have a top 5-6 unit, you probably should do that.
Probably worth doing.
And then defense, they were like, all right, what are 90% of our remaining assets? Throw them at the secondary. Throw them at, these 1-year deals on Marcus Davenport. So good for Aaron Glenn, man. Finally getting some help on his side of the ball.
Excited to dig into that because I think there's a lot to chew on. And it's similar to conversations we've had in the past, but it was fun to talk to Aaron Glenn about that. And we'll talk about that in a second. Blue chip check-in. We're doing this for all the teams. The number of blue chip players they have and who they are. It's caused a lot of consternation among the listeners. It's been the thing that people have taken the most issue with. These are hour and 40-minute podcasts digging into every single team, and who's on the blue chip list has been like the biggest gripe from everybody. So I think we have to be careful here because the Lions are in a place where their fans are very excited and very protective of this roster. How many blue chip players did you have for the Detroit Lions heading into this season?
Well, they're an annoying team because they have a lot of players who are like close, right? Who are like
so many on the line. That's what I'm saying. You're going to offend some people no matter what you say here.
I know I will. I'm gonna start with Penei Sewell. That to me is a very easy one. Frank Ragnow, it's pretty much just health with him. If he's on the field, he is one of the best centers in the league. He's incredible, and a true weapon in the run game. Amon-Ra St. Brown is one of the few primary slot players that I'm willing to give blue chip to. He's just such a great player, even though I think it's normally hard for me to extend that to guys who mostly play in the slot, whether it's offense or defense, but he is just an obviously fantastic player. That's kind of where it stops for me. And then you get into 5 guys who are very close, but I'm not sure I can get to blue chip.
It's tempting for me to put Laporta in there after what he did as a receiver last year. I don't think he's there as a complete player yet. He obviously still has a little work to do as a blocker and the way that this offense operates. They ask him to do that, but he was so dynamic as a pass catcher last year that it's tempting. And I do think that Aiden Hutchinson has probably snuck in there for me. We did a show last summer where we talked about the players that you need to win a Super Bowl. What are the non-negotiable aspects of having one on the roster? And one was a guy who can get 5 pressures a game for you in the playoffs. And even if Aiden Hutchinson isn't one of the best 6 or 7 edge rushers in the league, he does clear that bar for me where you can kind of build a really good pass rush around him as your best player. And that's why it's tempting for me to give him a little bit of the bump. So I think I'm going to say 4.5. And then there are a couple guys right below that tier, like Taylor Decker. Talk about all the left tackles we've thrown in this list. He absolutely is like a red chip sort of player. And I think Brian Branch is probably there, or at least is going to be there by the end of this season. But this team, I think, has a lot of really good players. I mean, you could kind of hem and haw about where they belong in a list like this, but the roster's in very good shape is the main takeaway here.
Hutchinson, I'm willing to concede because I think that's a good point. I think he's just right on that line, and he was tough for me to get all the way there, but I'm willing to push it for him. Laporta, fantastic receiver, but you got to throw some blocks, man. I'm sorry. If he can get to average in that regard, I'll give it to him because he is
I think there's a chance that this year is when he clears that bar. And it's very hard for rookie tight ends to be productive in any way, let alone what he did last year as a receiver. But that there's still a gap probably as a complete player between him and some of the other tight ends in the league. So I'm totally fine with that. Here's the counterbalance of this, though. We've been doing this for every team. What significant question marks does this team have on its roster? Because I don't think there are very many if you look at this thing from top to bottom. We can talk about a couple, but this thing is in very, very good shape.
Even the positions I have questions about, like wide receivers, some of your 3rd, 4th options, whatever, or even, pass rusher, they still have a guy at the top of that group that kind of makes it okay that maybe it's not complete. And so that's why it's hard for me to kind of poke any holes in this roster. Like, maybe you're a little bit worried that they're swapping out guards, but like they're got functional players, so it's kind of whatever. Like, it's just so hard to find an obviously bad thing about this team.
We'll see what Jameson Williams is. I'm sure we'll talk about him a lot over the next 20 minutes or so. And I still think the edge group is probably a little bit more volatile than you want, considering Marcus Davenport is slated to play a big role and he just can't seem to stay healthy. But we're nitpicking here. I mean, that's about as far as I can go with it. For each of these teams, kind of as we wade into these, talking about what you're watching the first month of the season, essentially like the biggest question you have as the season gets kicked off. What was that for the Lions with you?
They're letting Glenn have everything he wants. They gave Aaron Glenn all the resources this offseason. You go trade for a true number one corner in Carlton Davis. You go draft a guy to me who can also be a number one corner in Terrion Arnold. Terrion Arnold is not quite as big as a guy like Carlton Davis. He's not quite as strong, but he's just, when I watch Terrion Arnold, he's just a pest. Like, he's just annoying. He's right in your hip pocket. He's super quick. He knows exactly when to, like, if you go break on a route, he's almost running it for you. Like, he's just right there with you. He's just a very, very annoying type of cornerback. And I think that that's perfect for a guy like Glenn, who's going to want to let you play aggressive man coverage. And I think it's just a perfect marriage. So I really just want to see, like, how far can Glenn take this with guys that I think really fit his vision for a defense.
It was so fun to talk to him when I was up there a couple weeks ago, because obviously we have hypotheses about why they made that transition in the second half of last year. So the first half of last season, they're playing quarters on like 23% of early downs, which was the fifth highest rate in the league. And obviously the Saints played a lot of quarters when Glenn was there, and it's an aggressive version of it. So you can still kind of have a lot of that aggressiveness manifest with that style, but it was still a little bit further removed than I think from how he wanted to play. They were 15th in the NFL in man coverage rate on third down for the first half of last season. You go to the second half of last season, they're first in the league by a mile with man coverage rates on third down. And they went from 20th in the league in blitz rate in the first half of the year to 5th in the second half of the year. And I asked him, I was like, okay, what is that transition born of? And he's like, this is how I want to play. Like, this is my personality. This is an expression of how I see the game. And they went out and got guys who fit that mindset. When I asked him about Arnold, it was very funny. And I assume he'll be okay with me saying this. He said, one, he talks too much, but two, that guy is a corner. And I think he meant that for better or for worse. That guy is a corner. He is wired like a corner.
But that's one of the few positions where you need a guy who is clearly, his brain ticks a little bit different than the other guys.
I think he said it with admiration. I think that's what he was trying to get across. And you could say the same thing about Carlton Davis. So I'm very excited about watching this group of corners and this group of secondary players kind of fit onto this style. And the other thing is, I just think they have so many interesting combinations of guys, because Brian Branch is now playing a lot of safety in training camp. I don't think he's going to be a full-time safety. I think he's still going to be in the nickel a lot. But I was looking at the stats today. He played 117 snaps last year, Brian Branch did, when this team was in base defense. Kirby Joseph played 275. The goal is get him on the field. Like, let's have him in a Kyle Hamilton-esque role where he's close to a full-time player for us that includes some safety and some nickel. Well, so if he's going to be at safety, are there going to be some packages where Amik Robertson's at the nickel? Are there going to be some packages where Ife Melphone was at the nickel because he's a really good blitzer? Like, I just think there's so many different variations of players and variations of skill sets they have on the back end to deploy situationally with this team. I'm really excited to see what that ends up looking like.
That's such a great point, because they're going from, especially 2 years ago, but even last year, where they very clearly didn't have a whole lot of versatility or options in terms of like who they could play. And now they have 2 functional players who can play out of the nickel and 3 playable safeties, and Branch fits into both. But the fact that now they can kind of just mix and match and do whatever they want, you don't even know what you're going to get from Ennis Rakestraw. Like, he can play probably inside and outside. Like, they've got bodies everywhere, which is such a stark contrast from, again, 2 years ago, where they were just throwing out like Jerry Jacobs and praying to God that he can just tackle people in the flat.
Yeah, I mean, all their guys that were players from, like Kendall Vildor is now like their 6th corner. He was a starter last year when this team was in the NFC Championship game. They've made a lot of improvements at those spots, and I think that goes a long way. My question is pretty much the same. Essentially, how fast can this defense come together? I mean, you see the vision for it. And then on the front end, I'm just wondering how the complementary skill sets potentially come together. Because the way that we talked about DJ Reader a couple months ago and just being a DNA changer for this defense, I think they're envisioning him in the same way. Somebody who can really push the pocket pocket, somebody who can pierce the pocket. You have Lee McNeil, who's more of a penetrator as a 3 technique. You have Davenport, who's a power player on one side, and then Hutchinson's a little bit bendier. Like the skill sets and how they fit together with those four specifically, I get it. Like I get the best possible vision of that. How much we see Marcus Davenport on the field, I think goes a long way in determining the upside of that vision. But there is a path forward for this to be not only a workable defense, but a really good defense, one you put in your top 10. So I think they need a couple breaks for that to happen, but the upside is absolutely there. And I think the mindset is absolutely there.
Yeah, like you said, I put him top 10, so you don't really have to convince me on the upside outcome here.
What's keeping you up at night with this year's Detroit Lions team? Again, we're doing this for every team kind of as a counterbalance to what you're watching.
For as much as I love the upside of this defense, and especially the secondary, the edge spot outside of Aiden Hutchinson is it's a little sticky for me. John Kaminsky is going to be out, and he was kind of more of a run defender, but I think it's still something to keep in mind. Marcus Davenport has just not been healthy for a majority of his career, really. He's a useful player when he's out there, but it's just...
He's played more than 11 games once since 2020. He has 2.5 combined sacks in the last 2 seasons. Just worth mentioning as we think about the role he can play on this team.
And they're starting him. This isn't like we're having him in our rotation and we're hoping we get something out of him, kind of like the Saints are going to end up doing with Chase Young, which is kind of funny. They are just putting him out there and saying he's our starter. It's like, okay, man, it's pretty high risk bet. So that's a tough place to start with your edge too. And then Josh Paschal, loved him as a prospect, but he's kind of more of like a small defensive tackle playing on the edge, which is useful
him
for
and
like
Kaminsky. I think both kind of are like that body type.
Right. And that's great to have. But when you don't really have that much other pass rush juice on the edge, it kind of, you would like somebody to have a little bit of that juice. And then the other guys like James Houston, but he's really more of a DPR at best. And then he's even really been playing kind of more off the ball in the preseason. If you've been watching it, it's kind of interesting. So I'm just really struggling to see where they get a ton of juice off the edge outside of Aiden Hutchinson.
I think the answer might just be blitz more. I really think that might be the answer. And that we saw that last year when they didn't think they were affecting the quarterback enough. That's what they started leaning into. And something else Glenn said that I thought was notable is that style on defense where they're blitzing more, they're playing more man, it's complementary to the way they play elsewhere. You think about how aggressive the offense has been in going for it on 4th down. You think about how aggressive they are even on special teams, the amount of fakes this team does. That style fits who this team is more than what they were playing before. So I don't expect them to turn down those dials whatsoever heading into this season, because I do think that to a degree, something clicked in how it fit in the larger vision of who this team wanted to be when they started playing that way last year. What's keeping me up at night? I'm really nitpicking here, but I would say it's probably just a fear that they didn't do enough to shore up those couple relative weaknesses that we're talking about. You mentioned the edge group. I think that's absolutely right. And just, all right, could you have done a little bit more than Marcus Davenport in free agency this year? There's a chance it comes together, but I do think that is one of the weaknesses relatively on the roster. The other one is, are we just going to get to Thanksgiving and think this team could really use somebody like Josh Reynolds or a souped up version of Josh Reynolds? Like that skill set within the offense. Because even if you like Jameson Williams, and they do think that he's come along as a middle of the field receiver, somebody who can do more than just the vertical stuff, but it's still not exactly where his strengths are and how that skill set you can make an argument, I think still is lacking within this offense. So if you're not going to have that and you're kind of scrapping for who you like your tertiary receiving options are, what does that mean for this offense overall? Are you going to be sitting there missing a guy like Josh Reynolds by the end of the season? He's not a superstar, but he absolutely gave this team something that I think was kind of endemic to what their identity wanted to be on offense. So those are really my 2 big questions. Like, did they do enough to get this thing over the finish line in a season where they have real Super Bowl aspirations? And I've said this 1,000 times over the last 2 years, and I think it's important to say again, this front office and this coaching staff deserve the benefit of the doubt to this point. They have shown an ability consistently to identify guys, to develop guys, and to know that their roster was in the right place for them to get where they wanted to go. So there's a chance that I sit here on Thanksgiving again, and this team is rolling, and J-Mo looks like a superstar, and I'm eating like a plate full of crow with my turkey. That's fine. But at the same time, those are the things that I'm looking at when I consider where this team wants to go and what might hold it back.
I mean, it is very nitpicky, but that's just the reality of being a team that has Super Bowl aspirations. Is the difference between being one of the 8 best teams in the NFL and being one of the top 2 or 4 best teams in the NFL is this little stuff like this, where having a Josh Reynolds who can go get you 700 tough yards, that stuff matters. And we until we see it, it's hard to know how much of that they're going to get this year. Even if, again, there's a lot of reason to give these guys the benefit of the doubt, but again, you just don't know until you know.
For each of these teams, we want to talk about what we're most excited about heading into this season. What are you most excited about watching with these Detroit Lions?
I'm buying Jameson Williams year 3, man. I'm so in, dude. I'll start by saying I loved him as a prospect. I just thought he was fantastic. The speed, the route running, I thought there was really more nuance to him than I think he got credit for. I think he kind of got put into oh, he's just kind of fast and he runs down the field. But I think there was more to him coming out of college than it seemed like, people were saying. And
Like
I
what?
think
Like what are those layers to his game that you think might be understated as people talk about and conceive of him?
I just thought as a route runner, he did such a good job of understanding how to throttle down on his routes and really make corners think about when he's going to hit the turbo. Because there's some of these fast receivers where it's like you just have the one speed and it's not as threatening. Even if you're really fast, the speed isn't as threatening if the other guy knows, okay, well, all he's going to do is run fast. It's a lot more threatening if you have this ability to tempo up and down and really scare defensive backs as to when you're going to, hit the nitrous and really blow past them. So I thought he actually did a really good job of that. I just think with some of the injuries he had early on, them not really fully understanding what his role was going to be because they were making him kind of a gadgety guy. I think he just didn't fully get to show that. But I think now that he's going to be forced to kind of be more of a real receiver, and even was it, the back half of last year, and I think he actually showed some good promise there. I think we're actually going to get to a spot where he does look like a legitimate number 2 receiver.
Yeah, they're excited about some of the progress he's made between the numbers. And I don't think they know how it's going to look for sure when the games get started. And there's a chance that some of the ways they could use Reynolds, especially on play action in the red zone, where he was just a real weapon, like some of those moves where, you fake a run block and you'd be able to release, just like some nuances to his game that I think made him particularly valuable in that area. Are there going to be the same sort of nuances to what Jameson Williams can give you? Maybe not, but that doesn't mean in the aggregate, the offense is worse. I think it's just going to be a little bit different based on his skill set and playing through his skill set. So I think he's the most important player on the roster. Like in terms of swinging the way that this season can go. Talking to Barnwell like a month and a half ago, we did the guys who can swing the season, period. And I think he was on both of our lists. So what he is for them and what that means for where this offense can go, I think it is one of the biggest possible questions you can have about this team heading into the season.
And I think why he's so important, this offense was obviously fantastic last year, right? They weren't that explosive through the air.
No.
And when they were, it was because Amon-Ra St. Brown or Sam Laporta are really good with the ball in their hands.
Yeah, exactly. You have a tight end and a slot receiver or your best receiver, which is fine. They built a great offense out of that, but it's not like they had all this downfield juice.
Exactly. And we've seen Goff, even though I don't think he's the greatest deep ball passer, we've seen him be effective when he's had a Brandon Cooks or a Sammy Watkins. Like
he'll let it rip, man.
He will when he has to and when it's there. And so if they can get Jameson Williams to a spot where he's at least as good as like what Sammy Watkins maybe was in Los Angeles, they're obviously not one-to-one players, but something akin to that caliber of player, that's where I think we can really get into the next level with this offense, because they're still going to be efficient running the ball and throwing over the middle of the field. We just need to hit it downfield again.
My point of excitement is kind of adjacent to that. I'm just excited about where this offense could potentially go in 2024. Like this offense has been allowed to reach a very cool place. We've talked about this a few different times. Ben Johnson should not be the offensive coordinator for this team. He should have been a head coach multiple times over. When you have this build with a CEO type head coach and your offense is elite, like top 5 each of the past 2 years, that guy's out the door. That guy is getting head coaching jobs and you're having to replace him and cobble it together. They haven't had to do that. And I think it's allowed them to build on this in ways that other offenses don't often have the opportunity to do. And when I was talking to Jared Goff last week about, some elements to his game and just the ways that he's grown since he's been in Detroit, I've talked to multiple starting quarterbacks recently who've kind of lamented not having that at points in their careers when you're given the opportunity to build layers and layers and layers on success you've already had. And that's where this offense is. And that's why I'm excited to see where they take it. Like they have such a strong sense of what their identity is supposed to be. They led the NFL in EPA generated off play action last year. They had 4 times the league average. They gain 4 times the value on play action plays compared to every other team in the league. And when you think about all the different aspects to even their play action game, like there are chunks off of it, but just his outlets and his understanding of them on those plays. Like this is just a quarterback and a play caller and a group of players on that side of the ball that feels totally in sync. And I do think that this is a season where we're really going to see how far you can take it with a quarterback that has Jared Goff's skill set. We know he has limitations, but I can't really envision a better scenario to set up a guy like that to succeed. And I'm excited to see how far they can actually take that and where those limitations actually exist.
It's just so cool that Jared Goff has gotten to a point in his career where that's the dialogue that he can have with his offensive coordinator. And like, that's where he is mentally as a quarterback, because you start year one, Jeff Fisher, those Rams teams, absolutely terrible. That's one of the worst situations a rookie has ever had to play in. Then you get Sean McVay, who definitely at the time seemed more of a controlling offensive mind. But as Jared Goff, also, you're like, well, I just played in the worst offense ever. I'm just gonna do whatever this guy says. We're just gonna get as good an offense as we can get, and I'm gonna ride with it to where he can get to the point now where he is so clearly has a hand in what is going on in the offense and really gets to put his stamp on it. I just think that's cool, and he's really grown as a player. It really is fascinating to see what he's become.
I think we forget that guys built like him with his skill set, they're going to be the best they've ever been at 28, 29, 30 as they get into their 30s. And we don't often give quarterbacks that level of leash anymore just because those are the limitations and kind of the realities and the demands of team building in the modern NFL. But there's a reason that he's grown. There's a reason he's gotten better, just because players like that are going to get better at this stage. And he really has like settled into a very cool version of himself as a quarterback. And I think of himself just as a football player. Like he got married this offseason. Like there's just a self-assuredness and comfort and confidence to him right now that I think has bled into his play. And again, I'm just really excited to see what that means for the Lions this season and potentially beyond. All right, your most important supporting character for the Detroit Lions this season is?
Mine is Amik Robertson. You know, we started talking at the top of the show about the secondary and some of the flexibility they might have. If they really want to move Brian Branch to safety, getting really good play out of Amik Robertson in the nickel to where you don't have to stress so much about when we're putting Branch in the nickel, right? Like it buys you so much more freedom as to when you need to do that if you have Robertson just playing at a high level. So I think if he can play really well and just give Glenn a little bit of that peace of mind that he has not really ever had with this secondary, I think that would just go such a long way for this unit.
It's almost like what Arthur Maulet was for the Ravens last year,
Oh,
when he
that's
could
so
come in
good.
and play the
Yeah.
nickel and then have Kyle Hamilton pop back there. Like even just getting functional play from a guy like that is so important. And I think it speaks to how important it is now to just have depth in your secondary and have 5, 6 guys that you could potentially rely on. And theoretically, that should be a strength of this team. Like my guys, we've already talked about. It's Jameson Williams and Marcus Davenport. Like if those guys are good, this team is just supernova. Like the sky is truly the limit if those guys come in and are the best versions of themselves as obviously very talented former first round picks. So that was an easy one for me. For each of these, we're ending it with who or what does a successful season look like for each team, and specifically here for the Detroit Lions? What does a successful 2024 look like for the Lions in your mind?
I think you've got to get to at least the NFC title game. And you know, I think they probably have the best chance to get to the Super Bowl. I don't think they necessarily need to get there for this to be a surefire success of a season, but I think they've at least got to get to the title game.
I think that's fair. And I said go to the Super Bowl. You went to the NFC Championship game last year. You know, a lot of these teams, the Niners, we still don't have Trent Williams yet. Brandon Ayuk is still holding out. Christian McCaffrey was banged up in training camp. They've got a lot of turnover on defense where they're kind of moving in and out of some of these pieces. I really do feel like there's an opportunity here to kind of take hold as potentially the best team in the NFC. And if they don't seize that, I think that this would be a little bit of a disappointment. So I think going to the Super Bowl is a successful season for this team. That shouldn't be the expectations you put on any team going into the year. But based on what they did last year, I think that should be it.
It feels kind of crazy for any non-Patrick Mahomes team, right? But I think you make a good point where if you look around at the rest of the NFC, if we assume, you know, maybe the Niners are a little bit more turbulent, maybe the Eagles aren't going to fully get to their potential, the Cowboys are probably a little bit worse than they have been. The Packers are great, but still a very young team.
Yeah.
this probably is their best bet to really to go all the way and win 14 games, be the first seed, and get all the way to the Super Bowl.
New defensive coordinator in Green Bay. I mean, all these teams have some level of turnover. New defensive coordinator for the Niners. This is the team with the continuity. This is the team that has been unabated in their ability to build on what they have done over the last couple of years. And I think that you have to kind of take that and run with it if you're the Lions.